Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As I can see from the map in the icebreaker, we have people joining us from different locations. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the first ever Miro product meetup. My name is Lynn, and I work with talent branding here at Miro, and we're very excited to be partnering with Amplitude during today's meetup, where the topic of discussion will be how to survive success and luck. We will kick it off with quick introductions of both Miro and Amplitude before moving on to the panel discussion and Q&A. I will ask you to please add any questions you have along the way into the Q&A tab. You will find that at the bottom bar in the Zoom, and you should all have access to this. It will make us much easier for us to look at all the questions that come in and do our best to go through everything at the end of the meetup. But of course, feel free to add anything else in the chat. So let's get started, and I'll hand it over to Anna for a quick introduction of herself and Miro.
Yeah, sure. So may I share my screen? Yeah, I should. So hey everyone, first of all, I want to say that I'm really happy that everyone is joining today, and happy that we are discussing so interesting and a little bit controversial topic, how to survive success and luck. So, we at Miro are doing collaborative whiteboard, and you see that this is something where you can participate and everybody can jump and add sticky notes, reactions, and so on. So, I will quickly introduce myself. So I'm currently leading the use cases product line, which is focused on building end-to-end scenarios. I joined Miro 10 years back, and it was an interesting journey so far. And I worked in different roles like product marketing, product management, support for a couple of years, and leadership roles. And it's been a really exciting journey. And I think last 18 months were a very interesting ride. And let me share the context. So this is how we perceive success. Basically, it's the hockey stick. It's a kind of growth trajectory. But if we look at this, what it actually looks like. So this is the pink line. It's actually not that straightforward. So if we zoom into what was happening in the last 18 months, this is looking like this, because a lot of things are moving, a lot of moving pieces, and we will discuss it today in more detail. But for Miro, it was exactly like this. And what happened to us? So we grew 6 times in user base, which means that we have a lot more people than before, and they are all different. For us also, the collaboration pattern changed. So Miro is definitely a collaborative service, but before everyone moved to remote. So we had 50-50 ratio of synchronous and asynchronous sessions. But with the pandemic, we started to have 75-25 ratio when 75% is real-time collaboration. Our customer profile expanded. Complementary to what we had before, to UX designers and product managers who are pretty familiar with the Canvas-based tools, we got a lot of people who have never seen this type of collaboration. We grew in headcount more than 4x, so from 200 people to 1,000. And of course, we went all remote. And for us, what it means, and we will uncover this topic, but just to tease this a little bit. So this is a big opportunity, of course. And ability to help the best teams all over the globe to connect and build things together in very stressful times. And of course, it's a learning experience for us as a company, as a product, to go through very stressful, uncertain, and lucky times. And yeah, of course, it means high level of uncertainty, extremely fast change management and decision making, scaling teams very fast, and constant reinvention of ourselves. And we came up with, it's kind of my high level overview, what's helped us and what we are thinking about, how to survive this success and uncertainty and luck. So first is a strong sense of purpose, people first approach, agile mindset. And I wouldn't tease more because we will uncover this exactly today in the meetup. And what I would like to share is the examples of projects. So when we jumped into this high level of speed, high level of uncertainty, and high level of growth, it gave us a great chance to have some constraints and to focus on the things that matter. And despite the fact that everything was moving extremely fast, as I've said, so there are several examples of things that I'm really proud of, and the team made it really well. So we had an interesting project, so 100 improvements in 30 days, which helped improve very basic experiences for our users. We came up with a project that is called Empower Teams to streamline our own internal collaboration, which is definitely something that helped in uncertainty, but it can be easily translated to reality that we have today. So we started to do virtual offsites. I have never thought that it could be that effective, but it actually is, and helps build connections. And we introduced in the product, so we introduced design sprints and very fast decision-making cycles to make sure that we are keeping up with this growth and with this speed. So this is what happened to Miro in the last 18 months. And I'm happy to pass the mic to Hiral. So she will introduce what happened to Amplitude.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Hiral Shah. I'm a director of product at Amplitude. For those of you not familiar with Amplitude, kind of our purpose and mission is to help companies build better, more impactful products. So we kind of aspire to change the way people build products, especially through data. So we have more than 1,200 customers at this point who rely on Amplitude to help them innovate faster, smarter, by basically answering one strategic question, which is, how do our digital products drive our business? So the Amplitude digital optimization system makes the critical data that you need to answer this decision more accessible, more actionable for every team without relying on like all the data analysts and really going through that. So it helps unify product, marketing, developers, and executive teams around this new depth of customer understanding and giving visibility into what drives those business outcomes. And to Anna's point, like we've also grown tremendously in this last 18 months, you may call it, of the pandemic. We've crossed more than 100 million plus in annual revenue. We're at 120 plus, like trailing 12 months. And we have had 50% year-over-year growth in the last couple of years. You may ask, right, like, why is that? So I think about thinking about the confluence of factors that came together for us. Our growth is a result of a sea change of how businesses operate, how businesses are going to market, and how they want to drive revenue. So Amplitude's growth and the need for product-focused growth company is attributed, I would say, to two important trends. First, we are seeing that the revenue center within companies is shifting a little bit away from marketing and sales. It is moving to the product function. And digital products is what the whole business is about. The second major trend is about product data. Once you've shifted an entire business to center around digital products, you have to optimize your investments. There is this movement among the most forward-thinking technology companies to use data derived from digital products to make those strategic decisions. So when companies used to build products, they used to rely on intuition and surveys in the past. Today, that is no longer the case. Digital products generate a wealth of data, especially behavioral data, which is what fuels our engine a lot. And that's why to compete today, we believe businesses must become data-driven. And that's where product data is kind of the next untapped growth lever, which we've been able to capitalize on. And that is how it'll transform how businesses build. And the pandemic has just accelerated this motion at much faster rate than we would have probably imagined. So accelerated investments, especially in disrupted enterprises. There's been a lot of encouraged companies to take bigger risk, to reduce the processes, try new things. And even the already successful digital products that you might think about, or companies who are forward thinking, have grown way more rapidly in this last pandemic. And that kind of helps us because we power the data and the insights that people use to drive those decisions. Some of the dimensions of how we as a company have grown, we've added a ton of people. So just like at the beginning of the people year, we were like less than 100 people. Now we're more than 500. Just to give you a scale, we've added a number of new products. So we used to only focus on analytics. Now we have recommend, experimentation, our data management. And some of these have been through acquisitions. So they're not all just build, right? So we are all constantly discussing the build versus buy partner approach. We've expanded geography. We're now in several different continents, focus on EMEA, APAC, LATAM has also been now growing for us. And the target market, we have 26 of the Fortune 100 companies that are our customers. You can think about all the companies like Twitter, Walmart, Ford, Peloton, Shopify, Square. They're all kind of our customers, and a lot of their product teams use us. And the persona that we tailor to has also expanded from product to marketing, engineering as well. And what is the impact of all of this growth for us, right? Like the bright side is definitely business revenue, the excitement around the growth for the company, but it also comes with its own challenges, similar to what Anna was describing, right? The pain internally is how do we still move fast when you have added so many people? How do we bring them onto our cultural and principles and values that we stand by, like humility, ownership and growth mindset? We want everyone to embody that. So how do we do that? How do we think about the inertia? Like, there are times when people don't want change. So how do we think about scaling the processes where not everything is human-led? And I can definitely add to what Anna was saying is doing those virtual offsites. I think Miro has been a great help for us. But really, those are kind of a lot of the things we think through that we'll be touching a little bit more deeper on during the panel. So thank you so much. And I'll hand it over to Farbod now to talk through.
Hi, everyone. My name is Farbod, and I'm a product lead at Miro. And today I'm going to host a panel session between the panelists by asking a series of questions. If you have also any other question, please list them in the chat. I'll try to prioritize them and ask as we go along. So yes, let's start with the questions. John, you're next to me in the Zoom, so I'm gonna start with you. So when you look at the growth trajectory for the past 18 months, in which areas of the product and also your organization you have seen the most changes? Are there certain areas that disproportionately grew compared to others?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as Hiral mentioned, the one way you can think about this in this period of rapid growth is sort of an exponential problem, right? So if you add one persona in one place, as Lynn will understand, suddenly you need to market to that persona. And suddenly you need to figure out how to sell to that persona. And then suddenly you need to figure out how to make that customer successful when they do that. So I would actually say that in some ways, it's always difficult to hire, right? So in that sense, you're always growing your engineering team at this sort of design and engineering team almost at the limit of what's, there's a joke, you don't double productivity by doubling team size ever, right? So it's always this challenge that you can't just pour more people into it. In fact, that just creates confusion. And then meanwhile, you have this kind of exponential problem of every new product and persona, et cetera, adds complexity to the operation. So I would say that in some ways, while growing the engineering size teams kind of linearly and moving it at the pace that you would expect, the knock-on effects across like professional services, sales, customer success, marketing, all those groups have had to kind of expand to cover all this complexity. And so there's a great quote which says, like, scale is fundamentally a question of what has to remain the same. And so in that sense, like, as you grow really quickly, and you start creating this exponential problem, it overlaps into those groups. So I would say, to answer your question, the engineering and design kind of grows at what it expects to grow. And then with the addition of these products and complexity, you see an exponential effect across other parts of the organization. And so really the chaos is trying to manage that. Like adding 3 products is not like, oh, we'll just add 3 products. It's literally has a huge blast radius across the organization to do that.
Yeah, great, thank you. And actually related to that, you mentioned the adding more products, and I think Hiro also touched upon that. You have added more products during this period. At which point you have decided that it's the right time to add a new product, and was it related to also the growth, or I mean,
maybe I'll split this. I'll split this with Haral because she might have some ideas. I would say that in general, a big credit to the leadership of Amplitude is that we really stuck to our core. There's different ways to think about adding products. One is from a point of reactivity, or you're kind of driven, oh my goodness, we need to meet these growth projections. Therefore, we need to quickly just get whatever stuff we can get to sell. And then there's a much more measured, disciplined approach, which is having a hypothesis. And so the Amplitude hypothesis was broadly, look, it's centered around behavioral data and the data that you capture. And if we take our time, and some competitors moved way too early in terms of adding products, and we've been much more measured in terms of when to add these things in complementary ways. So like our experimentation thing, as opposed to kind of bolting on A/B testing, we really thought, what's the core of Amplitude? And that's behavioral cohorting and forming a hypothesis. And then what are we observing customers doing? And then how can we provide something that's end to end that fits in to the existing product versus kind of being bolted on. And so I think that for anyone thinking about scaling product offering, especially in a period of rapid growth, you really need to think carefully about what are you doing and what is the thesis and the strategic thesis behind that. Haral, I don't know if you have anything to add, but that's my view of it.
Yeah, no, I echo, John, what you said, like to kind of build on that, it's also when we've added these products, they haven't just become immediate, right? Like they're a little bit like a time in the making based on the needs and observing the customer demand. Yes, a little bit of some of that might have been accelerated pieces, but it's something that has been in the making for a while, right? Like to understand. Yeah. So it still goes back to us being product-led, is understanding our customer journey and customer pain points, and what are those natural evolution of things we can help solve. Anna, anything from your side for
Miro? Curious about how Miro views this now.
So you mean new products, or in general?
I think that question was specifically about new products.
Yeah, I think it very resonates in what you are saying. So how we think about that is like with some signals. In this case, it's growth. Your customer profile is changing. People start doing something different, and this is all about value creation. So if you have different customers, you should learn about them and what is the most burning thing. What are the use cases they're trying to accomplish? So for instance, last year we saw that when the collaboration shifted from asynchronous to real time mostly, we just noticed that this is the biggest scenario and this is the biggest problem that people are trying to solve. And we started to add new product lines that were serving the exact purpose, not to have these conflicts internally, because otherwise the teams will be competing for limited resources, and we just put dedicated focus for the most important stuff. But and how do we do that? So like we are operating, and I would say we are always operating in two modes. So one is reactive learning, bottoms up, what data is saying to us, what people are saying. And another one is strategic. So, and we are always calibrating ourselves between strategic horizon and something that is happening in real time. So this is how we look at it.
Great, thanks, Anna. And next question for you, and it's a pretty generic one. I want to know what was some of the key challenges you faced during this hypergrowth, both personally, but also as an organization. Miro.
So it's a great question. So I think the first one is uncertainty in general. because there was a certain point in time when nobody knows what is happening exactly, like what on organizational level, in the market, whatever. Like you just notice that something is becoming different, but it's a very interesting thing because it doesn't happen overnight anyway. So some changes and you do not know what is exactly here and how it reflects in the organization. So of course, for some people, it can be uncomfortable because every month brings us new challenges. And of course, you need to keep up with that. And another one is enormous speed. So, and I really like how Reid Hoffman is saying about this. So it's blitzscaling, and it's a marathon of sprints. And this is exactly describing the reality. And this is a big challenge because you do not have a break. So you inhale, exhale, and this is your break, actually. And this requires a lot of resilience from people. Another challenge is around things that always break. So you start to build any process because your organization is growing and something is changing. So you try to put a process in place to keep up with the scale. But first thing, your process should be 2 steps ahead of where you are now. So that is why you need to learn how to build those things because you have never experienced that. And you should talk to people, talk to companies who are bigger than you are, who are at later stages to make sure that you are implementing things and they are lightweighted, because otherwise things will break and you will be rebuilding everything from scratch and it's always a painful process. And the last but not the least, I think what happens with this growth and a really fast scale is alignment challenge. Because anyway, and John mentioned that and Hiral was talking about that. So we are growing, we are adding to our productivity, but actually we think subconsciously that adding more people will help us to have more focuses, which is in fact absolutely not true. So the bigger the organization is, the less focuses ideally you should have. And having these clear goals, clear purpose, and the way how to communicate those goals, to cascade those goals, and to align everyone in this fast scaling environment or any uncertain environment. This is one of the biggest things.
Great, thanks. Hiral, anything from your side?
Yeah, I think I resonate with like most of the things Anna was talking, right? Like we faced the same thing, going to also John's point, right? Like hiring the right people so that you're not just growing for the sake, but being thoughtful about it and going through those processes. I think early on, one of the things our company definitely, like, you know, and probably similar to many who transitioned the in-person to COVID, was just the adjustment to being on Zoom, to collaborate, to learn through those things, right? While you're adding new people, right? It's like, how do you spread your cultural values as you're growing for the team, but in this remote setting? And I think our company did a fabulous job of having a robust onboarding session, like, because initially when people used to join, they would meet all the leaders in person once a month. Like all the leaders once a month would give an overview of what does customer success do, what does sales do, what does product do, and all of that had to be refined and rechanged to be recorded. So making sure that onboarding experience for people is great. And then going back to just, you know, thinking more strategically still. So it's not just going and having those crazy investments just because you're growing to like grow whatever, because it might be temporary. It might be like, you know, so still having the long-term view, the 5 to 10 year view of where do we want our business to be? And then working backwards from that is like, how can we accelerate? So I think for us, one of the key challenges was also, you know, when we started working with enterprise companies, is to truly understand and work with them without observing them, right? So we spend a lot of time to kind of talk through those customers, really spend detailed amount of time to understand their processes as well. Because what is happening for us to be successful is also to understand our customer and how they are facing challenges, right? So for us, we also realized like we have to not only do the product better, but we have to have all the supporting functions with education, key stakeholders, right? Everyone know there are customers, we call them low maturity enterprises, but big chunk of that is just like people haven't embraced digital, right? And this is the first time they are also embracing. So how do we set those best practices and evangelize them? And that's what I know John has played a big role in helping companies understand digital, helping do workshops and really scale all of those as well. But John, anything else you would add?
I was thinking a couple that come to mind is one is the old guard, new guard problem when you're scaling. And then, there's no right person, but, the old guard has figured out how to navigate the organization informally. The new guard needs formal process to navigate the organization internally. The old guard, has tried things and seen them fail. So they feel they know it, but the new guard is like, oh, you're overreacting. I can do this. This is fine. The old guard is like, we've tried that. The new guard is like, well, at the last company I was at, we scaled to $1 billion and we did X, Y, and Z. So why is it not a problem here? And the old guard understands all the little nuances of the space. And then the new guard is like, well, I get it. It's product analytics. How complex could it be to do it? So I think that one of the things that's interesting is that you're at a certain point, you're shifting the percentage of people in the company. I mean, if you just treat it as a cohort diagram, like Anna's been there for 10 years, but the number of people who've been there for 10 years, for example, who have any of that context is things. So I think that that's one of the interesting dynamics is now the new guard brings fresh ideas, but they also tend to underestimate the nuance, and the old guard tends to over-index on the nuance. This is complex. I mean, I knowing what I know, all this type of stuff. So I think that that's one thing I would add is that it's a very human, and I meet with hundreds of teams, right? So this is all across the landscape in rapid growth. This is potentially happening. I'd also say that one of the other funny changes is in a startup, you have more work than people. Right? So everyone's forced to kind of do different things. And fundamentally, when you have too much work in progress, it's because there's more work than people. So people try to do everything. And then the most important work. Now, when you get bigger, in some ways, you have more people than the most important work. Now, that's hard for people to accept because you're like, well, I'm on the VR team, but no, it's not the most important thing. So what happens is you tend to have, this complex dynamic where how do you really focus when you're big versus when you're small? You're forced to focus. And when you're small, you get overwhelmed with the work. And when you're big, you're trying to figure out who's going to do what, so you get this fundamental shift at a certain size of company where, to Anna's point, the trick is how do you keep that startup focus even when you're at that point where you're like, oh, we just need to give that team work because there's 5 people there. So you don't need to give them work if it's not the most important thing to do. So those are 2 things that I would notice: old guard, new guard, and then the shift from more work than people to more people than work.
Very interesting. And also, I think Hiral touched upon the preserving the culture as you scale. So she touched upon incorporating some part into onboarding. Are there some other practices that you would recommend post onboarding that would help to preserve the culture from the old guard to the new guard, basically?
That's a heavy one. Well, Hiral, you were kind of new. You came in during the pandemic, right? So what worked in terms of preserving the culture, and where could we have done better?
Yeah, I think a big part, right, like with the company that I love, which is the principles and values, besides the humility ownership, is also the growth mindset. So I think everyone from leadership embraces and embodies that, where they are constantly seeking feedback about the processes, about change, and are willing to accept that. And because it is so ingrained and talked about in so many places, it shows up not just as like something on our website, but it's talked and weaved into any curriculum, any training. It's also sometimes how we recognize every quarter some values awards across the company that people are given on who have lived by these principles. So that becomes that part of the culture that is more ongoing. So that was really great to see. And because it is so growth mindset, people receive the feedback and change also with the humility and openness that we would kind of be thinking about it. And then the other is just what do you do on a day-to-day basis and how does your leadership show up, right? Like talking about it. So like within just the product and development organization, like product engineering design and all, we kind of every bi-weekly when we have all hands, we recognize people based on some principles and values, right? Iterative development, frequent iterations, how have we treated customer greater than company, greater than team, greater than me. So when we start doing that more on a regular basis, I think that trickles in, and that's how people tend to show up. And even when the new people are joining, they might have a certain idea, they kind of follow this method because the processes and stuff around it are meant to give more encouragement to these things. So I think those for us have definitely helped. And then taking time off, right? Like we all know pandemic, like burnout and all of that is real, and mental health, like we have a lot of programs from benefits and stuff side. So it's like not just the work, but the whole support group from our leadership and development, but all the way to like health benefits, mental support, and then time off. Like we had the whole July 4th week where in the US, the Independence Day, but the whole week off where everyone's disconnected. And that's like the perfect time where people are being able to recharge. And I think that gets set sometimes from the top, I would say.
Great. Anna, anything from your side?
Yeah, I was just thinking about these cultural things, and we have a lot of similar practices actually. And culture champions, I think it's a very good thing to have, because when people have recognition on the behaviors, not only about the results, we clearly see that this starts living within the language and within the day-to-day work. Another thing that we have is also interesting. I was really happy when we implemented that. So we have a Miro, you are awesome Slack channel. And people are posting praise for each other based on values and behaviors. And they're mentioning, so we have 4 values: play as a team to win the world, practice empathy to gain insight. So, and they put their very specific examples of these behaviors and praise each other, which is creating a lot of, first of all, like recognition, peer-to-peer recognition, which is important. And every time you're looking at this channel, so you see how many awesome people are working with us. Another thing I was thinking about, which is for me a really hard thing to tackle, is how to keep the knowledge evolving, not to learn again something and reinvent the wheel without knowledge preservance. Because this is a super hard part. You have a lot of new teams, a lot of new people, and they can probably do even the similar project, but in a very different way. And what is hard to do is to connect this old good ways that we're working like, and just inherit within new team, within new projects. And this is not the super simple thing to do. Because organizations, and that probably, John, it was your post about how organizations unlearn. And this is a very important thing. So this is a big challenge.
Yeah, one thing which I can think of, which helped me personally when I joined Miro to learn the culture, although it was remote, at least I'm specifically talking about the product culture, was the product reviews. So we had this panel where PMs would come and they would share basically their approaches toward the product problem that they are facing, and they would share how they are solving it. And the set of questions that would comes in from the audience, you could recognize also what Miro cares about the most, what leadership cares about the most, and also what peers of these PMs cares about the most. So that was from the product perspective. And adding to what Anna said about values, I'm noticing that the values which are defined by Miro is just keep coming back at us in different places. So one of them, like there's one always during onboarding, there's always during all hands or offsites or any places that we keep repeating them, but also during the giving compliments to each other based on those values, as Anna said, but also during performance reviews. So the fact that we have questions around those values within the performance reviews, which are still open-ended, but yet based on those values, I think it helps people to understand the culture in a short period. Maybe let's move to the processes. I think we touch upon the processes, but I think it's an important part during the growth. So Anna, this question, let's start maybe with you, that how Miro's processes, what were some of the challenges that Miro faced when it comes to scaling the processes during this growth phase?
Yeah, it's a very, very cool question, very painful, I would say, because I mentioned it already, and happy to double click. So you're scaling fast, and once you are scaling, you definitely need some operating model to align people around the organization. The trick is that you should build this operating model in a very lightweight manner because of two reasons. So one is you do not want to be in a bureaucracy because you need to move super fast. And this is a startup mentality, and people who can move really fast, so they usually are not big fans of processes. And another thing is like everything will break. So everything will break in a couple of quarters. So, and I think this is one of the biggest challenges. And what we did, and I can share the example, and Farbot introduced very good approach to product alignment. So we have this process which is called product alignment document and product reviews. So we standardized the approach how the teams in product are thinking about new solutions and new opportunities. I think like always a principle, it's always a principle about over communication. So, and we are using different channels for that. So no matter like if it's product values, if it's just company values, and we are using like every all hands starts with the notion that, hey, these are our goals, these are things we are striving for, and this is how we are doing things. And we are trying to incorporate them into every communication, especially from leadership. Also, the teams are referring to them when they are making product decisions. So, and it's actually about every story that you are trying to tell. So the key principle is try to incorporate it in as many channels as possible. So if you are using Slack, so there should be a dedicated place where people can see that this is a living and breathing. If you have a ritual around, let's say, product reviews or product alignment, these things should be incorporated into how people are assessing, into checklists, into like whatever. When we are making decisions, so or giving feedback to each other, this is also about the principles. So, and always refer to the principles. And of course, this starts with leadership and with product people, because they are serving a very important cross-functional role, and they should lead by example in order to make it living and breathing thing that everyone is really not just reading on some Confluence page, but actually is using this. And this is a very important thing, because like I really love what Andy Grove was saying about the culture. It's a mechanism when you are not having rules, so you cannot document everything. And it's a very practical thing, because it's a principle that allows you to move forward without asking too many people too many times about similar things.
I think one thing that comes to mind there too is you have to be extremely perceptive about the cognitive load of the team and questions around where are you pushing, are you merely just pushing process around, or are you keeping it at a reasonable amount? And so I did an activity, not with Amplitude, but with a team in the world. And I had them track every little event related to making a product initiative happen. There's literally, of course I use Miro, there's 100 sticky notes in there, ranging from the first idea it was mentioned in a C-suite meeting to, I need to have a meeting with you about that. I need to have a one-to-one about that. Or could we discuss that? Or could you show me a representative example of that? Every single review meeting. And literally 8 months later, you had hundreds of sticky notes. And so I think people think like, oh, developer time, or whatever. 95% of the time had nothing to do with typing. It was mostly about cognitive load. It was working it through the system. And so I think one of the dangers in the pandemic is people over-indexed on efficiency and then basically pushed all the sort of messy decision-making elsewhere in the organization. So it's like, to do that. And I think you need to be aware of both of those particular things, because you could have a highly efficient team, but the blast radius, I guess, was huge across the organization. Or you could have what seemed to not be so efficient and it's collaborating in real time and doing things that seemed not efficient, but because it was very localized and the team was independent and kind of making the decisions it needed to make, that was actually very productive and effective. So I think you need to be especially aware of what's happening to the energy in the space. And then finally, you need to be aware when you start to play three-dimensional chess. So like the minute that you have people thinking like, oh, well, we've got 35 epics and we've got one platform team. And if we give the platform team and divide their time by 6, and they do 10% here, 15% here, and 10% here, and 15% here. And if they hit their estimate of it exactly 72 days instead of 68 days or 75 days, then we'll be able to do X, Y, and Z. That's like an impossible problem. So you need to sense when you're starting to play three-dimensional chess, because that's going to mean that like things can come to a complete halt like when you're doing that. So I think you have to become much more perceptive in periods of rapid growth because things are breaking. I think it was a friend from Pinterest or another company like that. They said, oh, we design our org to reorg every 3 quarters. We might as well get used to it because it's going to happen anyway, growing at the speed we're growing. So yeah, I don't know. I was thinking about that while we were chatting. Not that there's any other infra product managers or tooling product managers listening, so you wouldn't be able to relate to what I said at all. So.
Thanks, John. And for the sake of time, I move to the next question, and that's related to North Star metrics. So I think I need to ask that to you, John. How did you approach setting up North Star metrics at Amplitude? I know you wrote the playbook about it, but just a short version. And has it changed over time?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a long history with that, and it was much more emergent, and it, started out with a basic idea of weekly querying users because that was the right thing at the right time. And then we adapted it to be weekly learning users to be more representative of the product strategy. And then we fleshed out the input into that over time. It's a huge topic, but I think for the purposes of this discussion and sort of rapid scaling and growth and luck, one of the key things is that you need things that persist over the quarters and the years. It really is a North Star. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, whatever, constellation you have that's stable. In periods of rapid growth, it's super important to have things that sit above the time-based goals, that keep the team focused so they can think quarter over quarter or even year over year if they're having the impact that they're having. And so, yeah, broadly, it was a more emergent process for us. We didn't just snap our fingers with the North Star one day, and then we adapted it over time to be more specific to what we're doing. And we'll probably adapt it again, as we start to learn more about how value is created, especially for these enterprise companies and their specific needs that we're doing it.
And is the hypergrowth, do you believe, has any impact on the change to North Star metrics? Because you mentioned that in some ways it shouldn't be tied to time and growth because that act as an anchor to help organizations stay focused. But at the same time, have you seen the impact of hypergrowth to change the North Star metrics in certain organizations?
In different, assuming that hypergrowth is some either change, really comes down to, is the company betting the growth on a new strategy or an existing strategy? So I always ask teams, do you have a strategy or not? Yes or no. Do you believe in it or not? Yes or no. Is it implicit or explicit? Implicit or explicit? And is the structure of the company match the strategy? So what you find in rapid growth is there's always a tension between the strategy and the structure to support it. And you could think about scaling as essentially the question of how to align structure around the current strategy. But there's always a lag. So the structure of your company might be optimized for the prior strategy, and then you're tweaking the strategy cyclically. And so you have to keep those things in alignment. So, I don't know what, talking about North Star stuff, but broadly, if it manifests the strategy and structure and org design is supposed to match the strategy, the idea is that these things need to be in sync. And so if your strategy is ship X this quarter, that's not a strategy. You're not going to be able to make org design decisions around that. But if your strategy is, we're going to move this and this, and this is what's important to us, then you can start making org design decisions even when you scale. That's what came to mind with your question. I'm not sure if it helps you or answers the question.
Great answer. Thank you. And maybe the final question for the sake of time related to the luck, actually, that's for you, Hiro. What's the role of luck in the success of the organization? And maybe you can start by defining luck in your own definition in this context.
Yeah, this is a interesting question. I think about luck is, when opportunity meets preparedness is like the best way to define it in my eyes. And I think about this not just in a company context. I think about this in my own personal career growth context as well. So bringing it back to like the company, it definitely plays some role in that sense, right? Like unless you are prepared to capitalize on the trends that are happening and are willing to be adaptable to make it happen, that opportunity is always is going to pass by without, you're either too late, too early to kind of think through. So in our case, right, like as I touched in my introduction about some of the trends we were seeing, like COVID had not only accelerated our businesses, but our customers' businesses. That definitely played a big role, right? You can think about it as luck, but it was also because we were prepared to step up to play that game, to expand our product portfolio, to kind of adapt to what our customers need. And that's where we were able to capitalize on that opportunity. So like people listening in the audience is like, always keep that eye on like, where is the puck going? And that's like a saying you have in the hockey game is like, you're not playing for the puck where it is today, but it's where it's going. And the more you prepare towards it, the better you're going to be. So like keeping that eyes on that industry trends always helps.
Anything from your side?
So I was thinking about the luck overall, like for me, it's something that is bringing big opportunity, which wasn't expected. Like, and basically, it can accelerate you if you have some foundations for that. Or it can be even worse than like if it's not happened. So you should be prepared. And like two things, so like enormous opportunity and unexpected. And you cannot predict that. So this is the thing. And in any case, if it's good or bad, it requires a lot of agility and a lot of very fast decision-making.
I was thinking one thing about luck is also accepting it. I think that when it's harmful is when it gets to people's head about what they were doing or what the thing was. So I think that that's like when you see, I hate to use sports analogies and stuff, but athletes are really good at talking about this, right? Like who've done it a lot, like they're very probabilistic in their thinking. It's like, they talk about luck in a really healthy way. And what I've noticed, especially in the Valley and things like that, is people don't want to accept the role of luck and where they're at right now, that's probably the more dangerous part, right? Where they're like, I'm a genius and all my ideas are perfect, when actually, yeah, you got pretty lucky and you put yourself in the right spot. And that's the skill you had, not that you're a genius to do the thing. So I think it's also about being really humble. And you see like with athletes a lot about that humility around luck, yeah, the ball went my way this time, but I wasn't playing the game right. And so I got lucky, or I was playing the game. You see with poker players a lot, like I was playing the game really well and, the luck didn't go my way today. And so I think that that's like, yeah, what you need, that humility is important.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Resonates a lot.
We are running out of time. So either we could close it or we could just have the final question from Wes, which says, does lean strategy apply to navigating uncertainties and being able to capitalize on opportunity? Maybe a short answer, given we already passed the time. Maybe John or Anna or Hiro.
So I can try to explain how I think about that. So lean strategy allows you to be very specific in the things that you're trying to learn. But at the same time, I do believe that you should have a strong vision. And combination of this strong vision and this experimentation and learning on the go, this is the thing that will help you to win. Because if you do not have any of this, like it's total fail. If you have only one, it's the fail as well. Because if you do not have a destination, you do not know what you are optimizing for, and you do not know what you are learning efforts striving to help you to learn. So that is why for me it's a combination. And I think what we adopted as a practice, which was really successful, and it actually touches the question about VX research. So we have some teams that are working in the weekly learning cycles, and they basically understand what is the big problem that they're trying to solve, and what is the audience that they are targeting, and what is the indicator of success. So how we see the numbers of growth, for instance. And when they're working on solutions, so they are trying to be very lean and to research every week and to deal with uncertainty every week. And the combination of that is really successful.
Great, thanks. I think that's the end of the meetup. So Lynn, is there any final word from your side?
Yeah, so thank you everyone for joining us today. And again, apologies for the technical issues that we faced. And a big thank you to John and Hiral for your inputs. It was very interesting to hear your experiences. And it's been really great having you here today. Before I let you go, I just wanted to mention that Miro and Amplitude are hiring. So if you're interested in exploring any job opportunities here, yeah, feel free to scan the QR codes and do some exploring. And yeah, thank you so much, and hope to see you again next time.